Chapter 331. Zhu Qiyu was very satisfied with the performance of the officials and left happily. Leaving behind the 3 officials, the group of 5 discussed as they left the hall. Su Yozhen's side was even livelier. Shi Heng, Shi Pu, Yi Ming, Jin Lian, and the others naturally gathered around him, congratulating him one after another. Su Yozhen accepted them one by one. He didn't mind building a good relationship with these people, and he believed that Yang Chendong would also be happy to see this. It was as if he had entered the tiger's den. Yushiyue's matter seemed to have been settled. With that handwritten letter as evidence, no one would be able to reverse the situation. Since they couldn't shake him, everyone chose to draw a clear line between them and hit him while he was down. In a short period of time, more and more of Yushiyue's crimes were revealed to the public. Even the family members of the guilty official, Li Wenshao, were dug up, and evidence of Yushiyue's crimes were brought out. But relatively speaking, this was just a stone in the well. After his private contact with Zhu Qizhen was exposed, his fate was already sealed. From Yu Xiong's death to Yushiyue's imprisonment, it had only been a few months since the Yu clan's defeat. Anyone who knew the inside story knew that while it was one thing to seek death, it was more to do with loyalty. For a moment, Yang Chendong couldn't help but become the target of public criticism. Fortunately, he had already prepared a countermeasure. At this moment, he was packing up his things and preparing to leave the capital. Yushiyue's case was in its final stages. With the tacit approval of Dai Zong and Zhu Qiyu, the consequences could already be imagined. Yu Yuanbi was also released by Yang Chendong. The pitiful young master thought that he could be saved, but he didn't expect that as soon as he arrived at the Yongding gate, he would be captured by the constables of the Ministry of Justice who used to smile at him. These constables, who used to look up to Yu Yuanbi when they saw him, suddenly changed their expressions, as if they were fiends who had walked out from the depths of hell. With such a huge matter and the collapse of a minister, Yang Chendong knew that he had to leave the capital. Otherwise, if he continued to stay here, who knew how many people would be concerned about him? Although he had Ling Feng by his side and his safety wouldn't be a problem for the time being, it was hard to predict what would happen if a string was stretched too taut. He would never do something as stupid as putting himself in the center of a whirlpool. When the matter was done, he left with a flick of his sleeve, concealing his achievements and fame. This was what a wise man should do. Fortunately, the acting ancestor emperor already knew about his departure, and judging from his attitude, he was very much in favor of it. No matter what, Yang Chendong's existence was a kind of pressure. Although he couldn't see it, he could feel it. If this person could leave for a while, not only would the influence of Yushiyue's incident fade, but it would also allow the emperor to do more things without any distractions. With the emperor's tacit approval, the news that Yang Chendong would be leaving for a period of time was made public in the Yang family manner. First, it was the Yang Family Academy, where the first batch of students was about to graduate. Originally, there were a total of 101 students, including Junko, but only 48 of them were able to persist until the end. There was no lack of outstanding students who were eliminated at the very end. Although less than half of them had graduated, Yang Chendong was still extremely satisfied. He was extremely concerned about their placement, even going so far as to speak with each of the 48 students to understand their thoughts and make the most appropriate arrangements. For example, Feng Ku, who had once been a destitute scholar, was extremely intelligent and quick-witted. He was often very interested in the topics Yang Chendong taught in his classes, especially physics and chemistry, and the things that people regarded as craftsmen. He was able to deduce many things from one example. In the Great Ming Dynasty, scholar officials and the emperor ruled the world together, and Confucianism was the most sacred. Only scholars, who spoke of the etiquette of sages, were regarded as above men. In comparison, even generals who were skilled in war were inferior. And this was even less true of craftsmen. With this sort of hobby, one was destined to have no better future. Because of this, Feng Ku had been distressed more than once. Now that Yang Chendong was here, everything was different. When Yang Chendong asked Feng Ke to come to the study for a private talk, Feng Ke told him that there was a place where craftsmen enjoyed a high status and had a good environment, as well as many unimaginable experimental instruments. Before Yang Chendong could say anything, Feng Ke expressed his willingness to go. He even said that as long as he could realize what he had learned and imagined, he was willing to go no matter how desolate that place was. In this way, Feng Ke was arranged to go to Qiqian City, where he would first be assigned to work in the arsenal. As for his future development, it would depend on his personal ability. Chang Qianhao, the son of the Chang family from Jiangnan. He was very proficient in business. After many days of learning, Yang Chendong used his personal charm to infect this person, making him one of his staunch followers. This time, he would follow Yang Chendong to the south. If there was a chance, he would naturally expand the Yang family's business. Although Tai Qingyi and Jiang Ping were women, their martial arts foundation was very good. After half a year of learning, they performed well in all aspects, and were left to be the bodyguards of the madams. In the study, Yang Chendong took out two seemingly very small Browning women's pistols. Both Tai Qingyi and Jiang Ping had dabbled in pistols before. They had even shot targets when they were students and had good results. They had yearned for such an advanced weapon for a long time. Now that they finally had their own pistols, they were very excited. There was also Wang Si. Because his grandfather was the current Minister of Personnel and was in charge of the promotion and evaluation of all the officials in the world, he had an important position. Yang Chendong kept him and let him become a teacher in the Yang Clan Academy to continue his teaching and nurture more talents that could be used in the future. Wang Si had some objections to this. After he knew that Yang Chendong was going to the south, he wanted to go with him. His teacher had said before that it was better to travel 10,000 miles than to read 10,000 books. For this matter, Yang Chendong talked with him in private for more than 2 hours, and said that this was still a test for him. As long as he passed, there would be a day when he would be released, and he would be entrusted with important tasks. Wang Si didn't know what it meant to be entrusted with an important task. However, since his teacher was the one who said it, he naturally wouldn't doubt it and agreed. He also said that with him there, the Yang family village would be fine and that his teacher could leave without worry. The group of students were arranged according to their strengths and characteristics. After the matter of the academy was settled, Yang Fu, who was in charge of the Yang family's business, was also called to the Yang family village. Yang Fu was Yang Chendong's cousin. The two of them had worked together many times in Jianghu. The reason why Yang Chendong could be where he was today was because of the various resources provided by Yang Fu. Of course, in return, Yang Fu was now in charge of the Heavens Beyond Trading Company, the Yang family's bank, and the trade with the Northern Wall. He had great authority, and the benefits he received were also very generous. After receiving benefits, Yang Fu respected Yang Chendong even more. After being summoned, he dropped everything in his hands and rushed over. The two of them talked in the study for a long time. Then, Yang Fu left in high spirits. Not long after Yang Fu left, he returned to the capital and went to find Wu Qingbo, who was now the military governor, Shiheng. He said that he was willing to pay a sum of money to ask the other party to send an army to protect the business. In particular, the trade with the Walla was the most important. According to Yang Chendong's intentions, once he left, Leng Feng wouldn't be able to participate too much in protecting the caravan with Walla. Due to the lack of military strength, the original company of protection troops had to be reduced to a squad. The reduction of military strength required other people to take over. Thus, he locked his gaze on Shiheng. Yang Chendong also firmly believed that the other party would be more than happy to receive such benefits that fell from the sky. It was just as he had expected. Yang Fu took the initiative to look for him. When Shiheng knew of his intentions, he was naturally excited. In order to express his modesty, he said that he would consider it carefully. However, after Yang Fu left for an afternoon, at night, he arranged for his trusted family member, his cousin, Shi Tong, to look for Yang Fu. In the following days, this person would be responsible for the safety of the trade caravan. He would bring 1,000 men with him. Protecting the trade caravan would not only allow him to obtain a generous amount of mercenaries, but more importantly, he could also bring in his own private goods to trade. The profits from this could be 10 times or even dozens of times more. Once this was done, Shi Heng would have more and more money at his disposal, and his influence would also grow. The matters outside were arranged one by one. To Yang Chendong, dealing with such matters was very simple. As long as his thinking was correct, it would not be difficult to do it. However, the following arrangements for the madams gave him the biggest headache. According to what Jining had said before, he could not take all of the madams with him. Taking 2 and leaving 2 behind meant that his home was still here. It could also be said that he was leaving behind hostages. First Madame Hu Yen and third Madame Shui, who were called along, were naturally happy and delighted. Second Madame Qiao Yin and fourth Madame Lady Xiang, who were not called, were naturally not in a good mood. This was especially true for Qiao Yin. She had been Yang Chendong's personal maid before and had never left the young master's side since she was young. Even during the trip to Crimson City, she had followed him all the way. Now that they were suddenly separated, it was easy to imagine how reluctant she was to part with him. For this reason, Yang Chendong accompanied Qiao Yin alone for the entire night. Under the dual attack of actions and words, Qiao Yin was finally persuaded. Not to mention actions, Qiao Yin practically spent the rest of the night begging for mercy. In terms of words, he said, people will eventually grow up. I already have 4 madams, so I have more to take care of in terms of basic necessities. Qiao Yin does not have to be as busy as before. This separation is also for the sake of better reunion in the future. Chapter 332. Qiao Yin was a sensible woman. She was already satisfied that the young master cared for her so much, talked to her so much, and even spent an entire night with her. For a woman like her, if she were to follow another man, even if she could become a concubine, she wouldn't have any status. Furthermore, her master wouldn't be able to counsel her alone. After Qiao Yin's matter was settled, it was easier to talk to Lady Xiang. In comparison, she didn't have as deep of a relationship as Qiao Yin and Yang Chendong. She had only become the 4th madam because her admiration had turned into love. Although their relationship after marriage was very good, she was still born in the streets and had once stayed in a place like the 9 Arts Workshop. Her position was still very low. Yang Chendong only needed to persuade the great madam to come forward and speak with her before agreeing to remain in the capital. However, she still expressed her reluctance to part with Yang Chendong. For this reason, the 6th young master had to console her. After interacting with her after marriage, he found that Lady Xiang wasn't just beautiful, she was also very sensible. The two's relationship quickly warmed up. After this short separation, their feelings for each other would only deepen when they met again. The 2 madams who stayed in the residence were settled. Yang Chendong did one last thing. He paid a visit to the Minister of Rights, Hu Shao, and the Minister of Personnel, Wang Zhi. Yang Chendong went to Wang Zhi's place alone, and no one knew what they talked about. However, when he left the residence, his expression was calm, so it should have gone smoothly. When he went to the Hu estate, he went with Hu Shao. The Minister of Rights personally received him, and his eldest son, Hu Changning, accompanied him for a banquet. Hu Shao could understand why Yang Chendong chose to leave at this time. No matter how capable a person was, they couldn't always stand at the heart of the storm. Otherwise, who knew what would happen in the storm? This step of retreating to advance was a good one. With Hu Ming's support, before Yang Chendong left, he asked Hu Ming to protect the interests of the Yang manor and the Yang family, as well as his brothers and sisters. Hu Ming naturally agreed. Since the Hu and Yang clans were already connected by marriage, they were now on the same side. As long as they didn't commit any grave mistakes, there shouldn't be any worries about their safety. The trip to the Hu and Wang clans went very smoothly, and Yang Chendong decided to leave the capital 3 days later. Yang Chendong was leaving the capital for a period of time, saying that he was going back to Lord Jianning to pay respects to his ancestors. As the 11th anniversary of his late father's death was approaching, the news that he was going to sweep the grave quickly spread through the upper echelons of the capital. Regarding this matter, many people clapped their hands and cheered. In their opinion, this was the price that Yang Chendong had to pay for bringing down Wuxia. You can't take all the benefits. Wuxia had fallen from power, and Yang Chendong had to leave for a period of time. It was really a lose-lose situation. Whether it was the Yang clan's prosperity in business or the uniqueness of the Yang clan's academy. In truth, Yang Chendong didn't have many friends among the scholars. He didn't fit in with the crowd, and he didn't take the initiative to interact with others. He always maintained a lofty attitude as he drifted away from the circles of power. Of course, this would make the acting sect master, Zhu Qiyu, let down his guard, but at the same time, the disadvantage would also be revealed. In some matters, there would be few people who would speak up for him. This time, Yang Chendong was going to leave. Everyone rejoiced even more. Some people even criticized that this move could not be taken as a sign. Yang Chendong naturally wouldn't try to explain this. He believed that facts spoke louder than words, and there would come a day when he would tell these people with his actions. At that time, he could almost see how resounding that slap would be. While everyone was saying that Yang Chendong had to leave the capital, there were naturally some people who disagreed. For example, the people of the Yang clan. Yang Chendong's fourth brother was one of them. Putting aside the fact that he was originally a member of the Yang clan, he had to consider the interests and reputation of the Yang clan. Ever since Yang Chendong came to the capital, his life had been completely different from before. Internally, there was more money in the estate, and he didn't need to plan carefully before he dared to do anything. Externally, he could walk on the streets with a straighter back. Even when chatting with people he was familiar with or in formal occasions, when others introduced him, their expressions would become much more respectful. Not only would this make one's face glow, it would also slowly give birth to a feeling of complacency. Yang wasn't a fool, and he naturally knew who had given him all this. Thus, when he heard that Yang Chendong was leaving, he absolutely couldn't bear to part with him. Later on, the steward at his side casually said, "Why not go with the Duke? You're returning to your hometown to pay respects to your ancestors, and Yang is originally a member of the Yang clan. Nothing could be more appropriate than to go back and take a look." These unintentional words immediately moved Yang Chendong, and he hurried over just as Yang Chendong was preparing to leave 3 days later. Yang Hodong truly hadn't expected that his fourth brother would want to go with him to the south. This time, he was using the excuse of returning to his hometown to pay respects to his ancestors, but as for what he was really going to do, only he knew best. His fourth brother's sudden appearance was indeed somewhat out of his expectations. But it was only a little unexpected. This clearly wasn't much compared to the major things Yang Chendong planned to do in the future. Thinking about it, since fourth brother had such thoughts, it would be a good idea to bring him back with him. This way, there would be a proper person in charge during the ancestral worship ceremony, and he would be able to worry less and use less of his brain power. Yang Chendong agreed. After all, he couldn't find any reason to refuse. But because of this, Yang was overjoyed. He hurriedly left the Yang clan manor, and he also needed to return to his residence to pack up. Of course, compared to Yang Chendong, who had a lot of things to take care of, he didn't need to worry as much. It was only 3 days, and it really passed in the blink of an eye. 3 days later, Yang Chendong set off. First Madame Huyen and third Madame Shui squeezed into the soft sedan chair with him. The others were indeed not as fortunate, and most of them followed on foot. Only the master, Yang Chendong, fourth master, Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, and the others rode horses. Most of them, Ling Feng, walked. Among the people riding horses was the Yang clan's old housekeeper, Yang Hai. As an old man who had followed the old master for decades, young Master Yang was no longer young, and his hair was more white than black. This time, he was going to follow Yang Chendong back to the Jian clan's old house, and he would most likely retire there in the future. This time, when he left, tears flowed down his face. They were tears that he couldn't bear to part with his son, Guan Yang of the Yang clan manor. After all, transportation was not developed in ancient times. After this separation, no one knew if they would meet again in their lives. As Yang Chendong's guards, the first captain, Qiu Vi, and the second captain, Dao Shao, naturally had to follow him. Not only that, Wu Sheng led a company of Ling Feng to protect him on the way. Yang San secretly led the main staff of the security bureau, as well as the members of the Wolf Fang and Ghost Shadow Sniper team to follow him closely. With them, unless the Great Ming Dynasty sent an army to suppress the border and could charge fearlessly, it was unlikely that they could threaten Yang Chendong. Yang Chendong finally left the capital. On this day, in many corners of the capital, and in many important places, there were sighs of relief. They didn't feel it before, but now that Yang Chendong had left, they seemed to be relieved and could finally breathe a sigh of relief. As for why all this was happening, no one could explain it clearly. While the people in the capital of the Great Ming Dynasty were greatly relieved, on the other side of the sea, the land of Japan was covered with dark clouds at this moment, and thunder was brewing, as if it was waiting to explode at any time. The General's Mansion, also known as the Great General's Mansion, was the mansion of the famous Japanese General Ashikaga Yoshimasa. In the capital of Japan, Ping and Beijing, on the most prosperous street, which the Japanese called Kyoto, there was a large courtyard that covered 4 square areas. At this time, if one could look down from the sky, he would find that there were people coming and going in this courtyard. There were no less than 500 patrolling warriors, not to mention some slaves who were responsible for serving their masters, and some hidden forces. This was the power of Ashikaga Yoshimasa. It could be seen from the place where he lived. If it had to be described, it could be called a prince's mansion, or even a small imperial palace. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was very flamboyant in his work. In his early years, he had helped the current Empress of Japan, who was known as the Emperor of Hohua Court, ascend to the throne. Based on this kind of luxury was not excessive. Almost like the Great Ming Dynasty, Japan was also in a serious feudal era, and there was a clear hierarchy between people. In comparison, the imperial family was naturally the most powerful force, followed by the civil officials and generals, followed by the merchants, samurai, ninjas, and finally the ordinary soldiers. The lowest level was the slaves, and the number of slaves was not small, accounting for more than 3/5 of the total population of Japan at that time. It could also be said that the development of Japan at that time was based on the contributions of the slaves, and the minority was built up by eating, drinking, and playing. As a minority of the minority, Ashikaga Yoshimasa controlled most of the military power in the country. In many cases, his power could even compete with the imperial family. Some military affairs had reached the point where it was difficult to carry out without his consent. As time went by, more and more people came to him, and his power grew bigger and bigger. This morning, there were still many people at the side door of the general's mansion. Most of them were pretentious. They all said that they were excellent and wanted to be noticed by Bo Lu, because this often meant that they were likely to rise to the sky and officially become a high-ranking person in society. Chapter 333. Every time the side door opened and the steward of the general's residence came out, they would fight to be the first to present their invitations. However, no one knew how many of them would be chosen by the general in the end. It had been more than 2 hours since breakfast and the side door had yet to open. Many of the people who were waiting were anxious. They did not know what was going to happen to them, and some of them did not even have time for dinner. Just as they were feeling anxious, the main door of the general's residence suddenly opened. This movement instantly attracted everyone's attention. Out of instinct, their footsteps were almost jogging as they moved forward. From their point of view, it was either the general's residence was welcoming an important guest or the general was going out. If it was the latter, this would be the best opportunity for them to recommend themselves. They moved quickly. The samurais who rushed out of the general's residence moved even faster. They were the first to rush out and formed a human net to cut off the connection between the side door and the main door. Then, they stood still like wooden pillars and stared vigilantly at the people who wanted to come to the general's residence. They looked like they were about to tell them to be obedient. If anyone dared to move, the sharp katanas in their hands would not recognize them. The solemn atmosphere with a trace of killing intent finally caused everyone to stop in their tracks. Then, they looked curiously at the main door of the general's residence. They wanted to see what was going on that caused such a huge commotion. While everyone was waiting, there was finally movement at the main door of the general's residence. A sedan slowly came in and a group of people appeared on both sides. No one could clearly see who was coming. What was even more surprising was that the sedan actually went straight through the main door of the general's residence and slowly disappeared from everyone's sight. This sudden scene really stimulated everyone. Then, everyone seemed to have forgotten their purpose of coming here and started to guess who the guest was. A guest who could make the general's residence open the main door to welcome naturally had a high status. Even in the entire Japan, there were not many people who could receive such an honor, not to mention such a mysterious guest. The identity of the guest only made everyone more curious. In the inner courtyard of the general's residence, the palanquin entered as though there was no one around. It only came to a stop in front of General Ashikaga Yoshimasa's reception hall. Then, the curtains of the palanquin opened and a man wearing a dark modern Tang suit walked out. His attire did not match the attire of the time. As soon as the man appeared, he first looked around. When he found that this was a very quiet small courtyard, a trace of satisfaction appeared on his face. Right at this moment, a burst of bold laughter came from the hall. A tall man with a mustache laughed and spoke in standard Japanese, "Welcome to Jing Shuangkuan's presence. You must be tired from the journey. Greetings, great general." Jing Shuang, on behalf of Commander Gao Xiong, pays his respects to the great general. The man in the dark-colored Tang suit called Jing Shuang immediately lowered his head and said with great respect, "That's right, the person who came was Jing Shuang, one of the students that Yang Chendong personally taught. Later, because of his outstanding learning ability, he became one of the first political instructors in Yang Xie's new army. His father was the current director of the Chisan City cement factory. His name was Jing Guang, and he was also one of the people that Yang Chendong admired and trusted." This time, Jing Shuang appeared in Japan at the general's residence under the orders of Regiment Commander Gao Xiong. He came to Japan to meet with General Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who had real power in Japan. At the same time, he also wanted to show the general the tablet that recorded Princess Junko personally killing Kimura Yoshimasa in the basement of the Yang family manor. Ever since Yang Xie's new army occupied Chisan City and began to develop vigorously, they began to slowly control this area of the sea. As Japan was a maritime country, it was inevitable that they would trade with their neighboring countries. Therefore, it was inevitable that they would come into contact with each other. After several conflicts, Ashikaga Yoshimasa did not gain the slightest advantage. Out of respect for the strong, Ashikaga Yoshimasa began to purposefully make contact with Yang Xie's new army. This matter was reported to the higher-ups, and with Yang Chendong's approval, Gao Xiong also intentionally or unintentionally expressed some goodwill. Thus, the relationship between the two sides began to strengthen. This might be the strength of the Japanese, but it might also be their weakness. When you were stronger than them, they would always lower their heads and act like a dog, and then learn from your advanced knowledge and experience. They would even nod their heads and bow their heads, shamelessly. However, there would come a day when they had the strength to overtake you, and it would inevitably be a merciless blow. For example, towards the powerful Yang Xie's new army at sea, Ashikaga Yoshimasa had always shown sufficient respect. This time, when he learned that the other party's envoy wanted to meet with him, he was extremely respectful. This was the reason for the scene just now. Under the warm welcome of Ashikaga Yoshimasa, Jing Shuang stepped into the guest hall, and the two of them began the so-called friendly discussion. As if he did not want his subordinates to see his weak and submissive side, or perhaps he knew that Jing Shuang's arrival had a special meaning, Ashikaga Yoshimasa quickly cleared everyone in the hall, and then personally poured a glass of sake for Jing Shuang. His originally smiling face became much more serious. Jing Shuang-kun, I wonder what brings you here this time. Is Commander Gao Xiong willing to form an alliance with this general? Forming an alliance at sea had always been Ashikaga Yoshimasa's wish. After knowing the power of Commander Gao Xiong's new warship through different channels, the general who envied the strong and longed for the powerful has always been fighting for this goal. For this reason, he did not hesitate to sell several merchant ships in Japan to the other party, just to gain a favorable impression and a basis for cooperation. This time, Jing Shuang's sudden arrival naturally gave him hope for the future. Ashikaga Yoshimasa's longing gaze was seen in Jing Shuang's eyes. In his mind, he couldn't help but recall what he had said when he attended the meeting with Commander Gao Xiong and the Naval Operations Staff Officer. When everyone thought that they could form a temporary alliance with Ashikaga Yoshimasa, they could rely on the other party's influence and powerful intelligence network to obtain more information on the sea. From there, they could take some targeted actions. This was far better than randomly searching the sea and trying their luck. The staff officers all agreed that even if they formed an alliance with Ashikaga Yoshimasa, and even let them view the new warships, they would not be able to steal this advanced knowledge. This was originally a matter of mutual benefit, but for some reason, when this matter was reported to the young master of the capital, it was denied without hesitation. Moreover, no reason was given for this denial, which made Commander Gao Xiong and the staff officers very confused. But no matter what they thought, since this was the decision made by the sixth young master, no one dared to question it, and no one could change it. These people had all seen the glory of the sixth young master, and they all knew that everything that Chiken City and everyone else had today was thanks to the sixth young master. They were also the group that had been the most heavily brainwashed. In their words, any decision made by the sixth young master, they would resolutely uphold it. Any decision made by the sixth young master, they would unswervingly follow it. This was the so-called Tu Van Ease. His thoughts returned to reality. Facing Ashikaga Yoshimasa's urgent gaze, Jing Shuang lightly shook his head. Then, without waiting for the other party to say anything disappointed, he changed the topic. Great General, although we cannot form an alliance with you this time, we have come with great sincerity. Sincerity? Ashikaga Yoshimasa was somewhat disappointed that the two sides couldn't form an alliance, but after hearing Jing Shuang's words, he became interested. He didn't know what else could be considered sincerity other than the so-called alliance. Although the trace of disdain in his eyes quickly disappeared, for Jing Shuang, who worked in politics and dealt with people's hearts every day, it was still sharply observed by him. However, he didn't say anything. Instead, he smiled and took out a tablet that was hundreds of years older than the current era from his bag. When the white tablet was taken out, Ashikaga Yoshimasa's expression didn't change. Obviously, before he saw its function, he only treated it as an ornamental object. He didn't know that it had the ability to record people's figures. Of course, he soon knew that Jing Shuang, who had practiced several times, turned on the tablet with familiarity, and then carefully inserted the USB flash drive in her arms. All these movements in the eyes of Ashikaga Yoshimasa had long made him stunned. The moment the tablet was turned on, he was actually petrified. When he saw the colorful screen on it, he didn't know what words to use to describe his current mood. He only knew that he was scared, and even a little scared. When the USB flash drive was plugged in, it began to play the scene of Kimura Yoshida and Ikigami being tied up. This great general, who had experienced many wars and been on the battlefield, couldn't help but exclaim in shock, "How did you put Kimura Yoshida and Ikegami in this thing?" "That's right, Ikegami, Ikegami, Ikegami." Jing Shuang didn't want to explain such a layman's words, but he did forget that when he first came into contact with these things, he had the same reaction. "Great General, don't be impatient, just keep watching." Reminded by Jing Shuang, Ashikaga Yoshimasa's eyes fell back on the tablet screen, and then he saw Junko holding a dagger. At this moment, he still couldn't help but shout, "Your Highness Junko." It was just that after this shout, Ashikaga Yoshimasa quickly shut his mouth without being reminded, as if he was afraid that he would miss something because of shouting. Chapter 334. On the screen, Junko appeared, and then killed Kimura Yoshida and Ikegami, who were powerless to resist, and then quietly left. When the video reached this point, Jing Shuang simply closed the computer, and then the hall was silent for a while. The sudden scene gave Ashikaga Yoshimasa an unreal illusion. He had never experienced such an experience, so when he looked at Jing Shuang, he couldn't help but make a request. "Can you show me again?" "Okay, but please don't talk anymore. Watch carefully. Remember, you only have one chance. You should know that such a sign doesn't appear at all times." After saying all this in a mysterious manner, Jing Shuang opened it again and released it. The scene she had just seen was displayed once again. This time, Ashikaga Yoshimasa looked very carefully. When he was sure that he saw Kimura Yoshida and the other two, his face became very ugly. At this moment, he wasn't thinking about how this thing appeared in front of him. What he was thinking about was that it was actually the hand of the lady. Where did she get the courage to do such a thing? Could it be that she was instructed by the emperor? Kimura Yoshida was one of his people, and the Japanese leaders were very clear about this. Now that this person was targeted, did it mean that the emperor was already dissatisfied with him and was going to kill him? All this was just to eliminate external forces. If he didn't do anything, he was afraid that the next big knife would fall on his head. A sudden visit, a real scene that he had never seen before, stirred up the heart of General Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who had charged into the battlefield and planned strategies. Seeing that he fell into silence, Jing Shuang, who was sitting opposite him, had no expression on her face, but her heart was very clear that a seed of hatred was planted. As for what effect it would have, it all depended on the development of the next thing. There is heaven above, there is Suzhou and Hangzhou below. The allusion came from Song Fan Chunga's Records of Wu County, Heaven Above, Suzhou and Hangzhou Below. It meant that heaven above was the most beautiful, and Suzhou and Hangzhou were the most beautiful. It described the beauty, prosperity, and wealth of Suzhou and Hangzhou. The beautiful scenery of Hangzhou was unparalleled in the world, and the scenery of the West Lake was the best in the world. Many popular stories had appeared here in the past. For example, Bai Suzhen and Su Xian had met here by chance. At this moment, the Lei Feng Tower in the story was still standing. Opposite the Lei Feng Pagoda, there were numerous restaurants, which were specially set up for people who came here to rest and eat. Among them, the largest restaurant, Xinglong Restaurant, was by the window. The view here was broad and the scenery was excellent. In addition, it was May, the time when spring and summer alternated. It was indeed a place with birds singing and flowers fragrant. It was better than the polar regions of the world. The table in the best position was already filled with famous local snacks. The signature dishes of the restaurant were spread all over the table, showing that the guests who came to eat were rich and imposing. A pot of old wine that had been warmed was still sitting on the table. Occasionally, a spring breeze would blow past, and the fragrance of the wine would be blown out. When one smelled it, it was really mellow and rich, making one intoxicated. Sixth brother, this place is really good. The climate is pleasant. I don't want to go back. Next to the table, a rather elegant middle-aged man tasted the delicious food on the table and couldn't help but say. Then he kept greeting the other two women at the table. "Come on, sisters-in-law, don't just look at the beautiful scenery. You also need to eat. Otherwise, wouldn't it be a waste?" "Yes, fourth brother is right." The two women who were greeted shyly nodded their heads. They were both beautiful and had white veils on their faces. However, the youngest man at the table first moved the corners of his mouth slightly, and then he said with a smile, "Shui, since you are here to have fun, you don't need to wear a veil. It's hard to see things. Take it away." "This. I'll listen to sixth brother." Yan, who was called, seemed to have a little struggle in her heart, but in the end, she obediently took off her veil. Sure enough, at this moment, when looking at the beautiful scenery of West Lake in the distance, it was much clearer and more thorough. At this point, everyone could guess that the four people at the table were Yang Chendong, Yan, and Madame Shui. After leaving the capital, they went all the way south. They passed by Tianjin, Suzhou, and bought some good and famous silk and satin. Then they went to Songjiang Prefecture and arrived in Hangzhou. As soon as they entered this place, Yan and Madame Shui were very excited. They had heard about White Snake from Yang Chendong, so they were naturally curious about this place. Now that they had the opportunity to see this scene, how could they not be immersed in it? At the same time, they also wanted to see if they could really see the deified love story between White Snake and Su Xian here. In later generations, there was a song that said, "The stories in fairy tales are all lies." At this moment, it was indeed true. From a distance, there were many people who came here to play. However, Bai Jinxing in white, the maid Shaoqing in green, and Su Xian in scholars' robes were nowhere to be seen. There wasn't even a single person who looked like them. Yan, who was full of hope, was disappointed because she couldn't find any of them. Madame Shui, who was standing beside them, said something. She probably said that her husband was good at teasing people. Anyway, the two girls kept laughing. It was very indecent for a woman to laugh in a diplomatic setting, especially a married woman. Although Yang felt a little uncomfortable, he still endured it in the end. His sixth brother wasn't as simple as a younger brother. He could see everything clearly, so he must have a clear idea of what to do with women. Maybe there was a deeper meaning to this matter? However, Yang Chendong's thinking was simply based on the ideas of the later generations. Equality between men and women was not necessarily fair, but at least it was not strange for women to laugh in public. Since they came out to play, they just wanted to have fun. As long as they were happy, it was fine. As for whether such behavior would attract other people's attention, he didn't care very much. Few people here knew him, and it wouldn't be long before he left here. It was just a post house in life. There was no need to be so serious. Yang Chendong didn't take the two women's laughter to heart. He looked deeply and quietly at the West Lake in front of him. In his previous life, Yang Dong had been very busy. He trained, completed tasks, trained again, and completed tasks again. It wasn't until he was old and his physical fitness and stamina had declined that he went to the headquarters. As a result, his beautiful life and youth were wasted. It was good to be young again at this moment. He would cherish every minute and every second. 9 out of 10 things in life did not go according to one's wishes. Yang Chendong wanted to properly feel this tranquil atmosphere. However, there was a burst of extremely noisy noise coming from downstairs. Although it was separated by the floor and could not be completely transmitted, it was obvious that there was some agitation. Dang dang dang, the sound of footsteps quickly began to be heard. Then, a middle-aged man in brocade clothes came up with a face full of anxiety. After Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei, who were guarding the entrance of the building, confirmed that there was no murderous intent on the other party, they invisibly let the man go, allowing him to smoothly come to Yang Chendong's table. "Oh, honored guest, I'm really sorry. Your table was originally reserved. Now that the owner is here, I want to see if you. The middle-aged man's surname was Sunday. He was the owner of Xinglong restaurant. Just now, he was the one who received Yang Chendong and his group. He also said that the condition of the private room upstairs facing the street was the best and so on. But how did the private room get booked in the blink of an eye? This matter was rather intriguing and thought-provoking. As one of the capital's hedonistic sons, Yang had experienced this kind of thing more than once or twice. It must be said that businessmen were all profit-seeking. Sometimes, they were especially serious in this aspect. They could tell several different stories and different versions with just a few words. Of course, sometimes they might be coerced. After all, the status of businessmen in the Great Ming Dynasty was not high. They once had no social status. Just like now, Boss Sun was urging him to say such words. Perhaps he wanted to make more money, or perhaps he was being pressured by something. But no matter what, this was a bit like bullying. Yang, who was clear about this, would not give in to the other party. He immediately stood up from the table and said with a serious face, "What's the matter? What do you mean it's already reserved? That's not what you said just now." No matter what, he was still a descendant of the Yang family. He had been influenced by what he saw and heard since he was a child. He also had the experience of being an official, so he had a kind of aura. As soon as these words came out of his mouth, Boss Sun felt a burst of pressure. But after all, as the owner of such a big restaurant, it was impossible to say that he did not have the ability to suppress his aura. Although he also knew that what he did today was a bit too much and wrong. But the situation was stronger than the person. When he thought of the master downstairs who insisted on this private room, he felt a headache coming. At this moment, he had to lower his head and explain. "I made a mistake. I forgot that this place was originally reserved. So, today's meal is my treat. I'm sorry." "Treat us? Do you think you're worthy?" Yang said without hesitation. Originally, he thought that there was something fishy about this matter. Now that the other party said that the bill was free, he felt more confident in his heart. "Okay, Boss Sunday. Since you're in a difficult position, we won't argue with you. It just so happens that we're almost done eating, so we'll leave now." Yang Chendong finally spoke. Coming out to play was a mood. Now that the mood was ruined, even the best seats and scenery had lost their meaning at this moment. Since that was the case, it was better to leave and return to the inn. Chapter 335. Yang Chendong expressed his attitude. Although he was still angry and dissatisfied, he could only suppress it. He turned his head and snorted to express his dissatisfaction. Mr. Sun, on the other hand, kept bowing to Yang Chendong and thanking him. Then he turned around and led them downstairs in person. On the second floor of Xinglong restaurant, 6 or 7 strong men were standing there and talking about something. From a distance, they seemed to be surrounding one of them and saying some flattering words. In Yang Chendong's life, this kind of thing couldn't be more insignificant. He didn't even want to take another look at it. However, there were many things in the world that had nothing to do with you even if you didn't want to. There were always some people who came to find you and could not be refused. Just like now, Yang Chendong and Mrs. Xue had walked past the corner of the second floor and went straight down to the first floor under the guidance of Mr. Sunday. Behind them, Hu Yan and Mrs. Xue followed. However, they seemed to be saying that their husband was lying. There was no such thing as White Lady and Su Xian here. When they talked about this, they couldn't help but chuckle. Just then, a gust of wind blew over and blew on Hu Yan's white veil. At a certain moment, the national beauty under the white veil was exposed. It happened to be seen clearly by a man in the crowd. It was not completely clear. He only knew that the woman was very beautiful and had very good skin. But this was enough. For many men, the more vague some things were, the more they could arouse their curiosity. If they could see through it at a glance, it would lose its original meaning. It was this glimpse that caused the man's heart to skip a beat. Then, his body actually reacted in a primitive way. Perhaps he was used to such things, so he instinctively took a few hurried steps, passed through the crowd, and went straight to where Yuan and Mrs. Shui were. His reaction was not slow. Beta Persei, who was responsible for guarding Yuan and Mrs. Shui, instinctively reacted faster. When he felt a gust of wind, he had already stepped between the man who was about to do something. Scram! Suddenly, a tower-like man appeared in front of him. His figure was also very tall and sturdy, and he said this in an unfriendly manner. Then, he threw a punch over. Wind whistled as the punch was unleashed. Just by listening to the sound, one could determine the power of this punch. Boom! Beta Persei, who had hurriedly returned a punch, stood there as steady as Mount Tai, as if the punch just now was not his arm at all. The man who threw out the first punch couldn't help but stagger. He took 2 steps back before stabilizing himself. At this moment, his eyes were filled with anger. Who was Qi Qing? With his background, it could be said that he could do whatever he wanted in Hangzhou Prefecture. Not many people could control him. But now, not only did someone stop him, he was even forced to take 2 steps back in the domain that he was most proud of. This was not as simple as just suffering a loss, it had reached the level of humiliation. Qi Qing had another title, Hangzhou Divine Fist. But just now, the punch he had thrown out was a preemptive strike. Yet, not only was it casually dispelled by someone else, the other party didn't even move an inch, but he was forced to take 2 steps back. This was somewhat inconceivable. What's going on? Master Qi. The commotion here finally attracted the attention of others. When they saw Qi Qing's face alternating between white and red, the 7 men who were originally surrounding him and flattering him all gathered together. Then, they glared angrily at Beta Persei, who was standing there motionless. If anger could kill, Beta Persei would have died countless times by now. Yang Chendong, who was walking in front, also heard the commotion behind him. Although he did not have eyes in the back of his head and did not see what had just happened, he believed in Beta Persei. If the other party had not provoked him first, Beta Persei would never have made a move. While Yang Chendong was still thinking about what had happened, his 4th brother, Yang, had already strode over, shouting as he walked over, "What's going on? Who ate the bear's heart and leopard's gall? Looking for trouble, huh?" This was the way of the foppish. No matter what happened, it was always necessary to gain the upper hand by a show of strength. Perhaps if they were lucky, they could directly intimidate the other party into not daring to speak again. Then, it would be much easier to solve the problem. Of course, people who dared to speak like this more or less had to have some background. Otherwise, there would always be a moment when they would be exposed and unable to continue pretending. Of course, Yang was considered to have some background. Putting everything else aside, just by mentioning his 6th brother's name, he could do whatever he wanted in the capital. There were not many people who were blind enough to offend him. But the capital was the capital after all, and this was Hangzhou. None of them knew Yang. Seeing that someone had suddenly walked over while shouting and charging straight at them, Qi Qing, who had suffered at the hands of Beta Persei, had a flash of anger on his face. Then, he suddenly gave up on the confrontation with Beta Persei and changed his target to Yang, charging straight at him. Perhaps as a martial artist, he could tell that Yang was only good at talking, so he wanted to pick on the weaker one to show his strength. But what he did not know was that this time, he had picked the wrong opponent. Although Yang Chendong was not good at martial arts and only relied on brute force to fight, how could he let his 4th brother be at a disadvantage when Yang Chendong was here? Just as Qi Qing suddenly rushed over, another figure had already rushed out first. Then, with a bang. After a loud sound, a human figure continuously retreated until his body hit 2 tables in succession. Only then did he stop. Although his figure had stopped, he was still in an extremely sorry state. His originally clean clothes were stained with vegetable soup and oil, and he looked like a drowned rat. Standing opposite him was a young man who was not tall but had a very sturdy body. His eyes were cold, and at this moment, he was squatting in a firm horse stance. His eyes were full of provocation. After being pushed back twice in a row, Qi Qing only felt a sense of suffocation in his chest. Usually, when he fought with people in Hangzhou, how many of them could withstand a few moves from him? Because of this, he gained the reputation of the Hangzhou Godly Fist. For this reason, he even founded a martial arts center called the Boxing Hall. Many people in the martial arts world would respectfully clasp their fists and greet him when they saw him, sect leader Qi. That was a very honorable thing to do. But today, he had actually suffered 2 losses in a row in front of a group of people. He had lost to 2 different people, and both times, he had gained the upper hand by striking first. How could this not make him angry? He felt that all the moves he had learned in the past seemed to have become useless. Qi Qing, who had lost a lot of face, could not swallow this bitter fruit. He glanced at his friends who came with him, and evil grew from his guts. He pointed at Beta Persei and the others and shouted, "Everyone, let's go together and cripple them. If anything happens, I, Qi Qing, will be responsible." The 7 people around him were all here for Qi Qing. They more or less had something to ask of this person in the future. Now that their benefactor had spoken, there was no reason to not listen. They thought that this was Hangzhou, and everyone was more or less people of status. They were just a group of brave foreigners, so what was there to be afraid of? With this thought in mind, the 7 of them first exchanged glances across the air, then shouted and rushed toward Beta Persei and the others. And from the looks of it, 3 or 4 of them had learned martial arts. At least when they fought, their postures were very good. Xiao Vi, go easy on them. Don't kill them. Yang Chendong had already seen the situation clearly. Although he did not know the reason, these people had come to find fault with them again and again. Since that was the case, there was no need to be polite. He just needed to teach them a lesson. Xiao Vi, who had defeated Qi Qing earlier and whose eyes were filled with murderous intent, heard Yang Chendong's order. He immediately nodded and then waved his hand. 7 people from the first guard team walked out to meet the 7 opponents who were shouting and rushing toward them. They were not equal in strength to begin with. When they fought, the situation was naturally one-sided. Among the 7 people, even the so-called martial arts master who had learned 2 styles could only block 1 move from the members of the Cold Front team. Then, he was beaten up passively. The shouts of being beaten quickly spread throughout the 2nd floor of the restaurant. What happened here had already frightened the other diners. Those who were timid had already run out, leaving behind those who were bold. When they saw Qi Qing being beaten up, they all ran away. This might be the influence of evil people. Because Qi Qing was an evil person, who knew if he would find trouble with those who saw him suffer after he recovered from his shock. All the unrelated people had run away, leaving only Boss Son of Xinglong Restaurant. He was also helpless. The monk could run away, but the temple could not. It was probably describing people like him. Aya, stop fighting. It's all a misunderstanding. It's all a misunderstanding. Sect Master Qi is a person of status. You guys stop. Boss Son tried to stop the fight, but he was afraid that he would be hurt. He pretended to go forward and shouted loudly, as if he wanted to use these words to scare the foreigners who came to his restaurant for the first time. In fact, there was no need for Boss Son to shout. The members of the Cold Front team had already stopped. This kind of blindly beating people up did not feel good. It was like an adult facing a 3-year-old child. No matter how they beat, they would lose interest. Let's go. Yang Chendong could also see that this was not a fair fight. He shook his head disinterestedly. With Yang Chendong's words, the members of the Cold Front team naturally returned to their team. However, when they left the restaurant, everyone was clearly more vigilant. In the dark, the people from the security bureau had already seen everything. Then, they began to carry out their activities. Chapter 336. There was a large courtyard in the East District of Hangzhou. This was one of the outer residences of the Chang clan, a wealthy merchant in the south. Chang Qianhao, as the eldest son of the Chang clan and the future head of the Chang clan, was carefully standing in front of the man in green clothes in the courtyard. Qianhao. There are no outsiders here, so you don't have to be so restrained. Standing in front of him was Yang Chendong. When he saw Chang Qianhao's serious and even somewhat nervous appearance, he tried to use words to enlighten him. The more he said this, the more nervous and cautious Chang Qianhao became. Master, the ancient said that a teacher for a day is a father for life. You have done a great favor for Chang Qianhao and the Chang clan. Okay. Knowing what he was going to say next, Yang Chendong gently patted his forehead and said helplessly, regarding the matter of handing over the Heavens Beyond Trading Company in the south to the Chang clan, as my student, you naturally have a certain connection, but more importantly, I still considered the strength of the Chang clan. Besides, not only your Chang clan, but the other clans in the south also have resources allocated. This is originally a normal business, so you don't have to be so grateful to me. No. Master, the ratio of the Chang clan is the highest. For this matter, the grandfather in charge of the clan has already sent a letter to Qianhao, asking me to take care of Master's food and accommodation no matter what, but I don't know if there is anything that Master is dissatisfied with. No, everything is very good, very good. Yang Chendong chuckled. He could feel the admiration and gratitude of this student to him. Some of the rare goods of Heavens Beyond were indeed distributed to the Chang clan due to the fact that the other party was his student. However, he still couldn't accept such an action of greeting twice a day. Young master, Yang San is here. The timely appearance of Tiger's mane could be considered as a solution. Chang Qianhao had studied in the Yang clan academy for half a year, so he naturally knew that the identity of the person who came was not simple. He also knew that Yang Chendong had something important to do, so he respectfully took his leave and said that he would come to pay his respects before dinner. Chang Qianhao respectfully left. Yang Chendong didn't wait for Tiger's mane to speak and spoke first. Look after him. I don't have time to see him tonight, so he doesn't have to pay his respects. Oh. Tiger's mane wanted to laugh, but he didn't dare to. He naturally saw that because of Chang Qianhao's excessive enthusiasm, the young master was already vexed. Alright, let Yang San in. Yang Chendong could see that he was gloating a little, but he also knew that there were some things that he ordered, and the other party would do very well. Otherwise, he wouldn't have become his best confidant. Speaking of business, Tiger's man did not dare to be negligent in the slightest. He turned around and left. Yang Chendong soon followed him to Yang Chendong. Then, some specific information about Qi Qing was sent to him. Hangzhou Divine Fist. Qi Bushen. Interesting. Yang Chendong's voice sounded from the courtyard with a smile that was not a smile. Hangzhou Government Office. In the backyard, a wailing sound came from one of the rooms. The sound was so loud that everyone in the courtyard became very cautious. A middle-aged man dressed in a fourth-rank official's robe was currently pacing back and forth in the courtyard. Perhaps it was due to his anxiety, but all the servants in the courtyard were extremely cautious, as if they were afraid that they would do something that they shouldn't do and provoke this official, resulting in them being severely punished. The man's name was Qi Bushen. He was the prefect of Hangzhou, a fourth-rank official. The wailing man in the room was Qi Qing, who was beaten up. He was also Qi Bushen's cousin. The two of them grew up together and had a very good relationship. When he returned with wounds all over his body, the entire estate was in chaos. The steward of the estate immediately invited a famous physician from Hangzhou Prefecture to examine his illness. The screams in the room earlier were probably due to the commotion caused by the palpation. Creak. The door of the room was pushed open from the inside. Then, the housekeeper accompanied a doctor who was carrying a medicine box and walked out. Qi Bushen, who saw all of this, quickly went up to the doctor and asked anxiously, "How is he?" Reporting to the prefect, sect leader Qi did not suffer any internal injuries. There is only one fracture and many bruises on his body. I'm afraid that he will need to rest for a period of time before he can recover, the doctor answered carefully. Oh, thank you. Men, double the consultation fee and send the doctor out. Qi Bushen waved his hand and then entered the room with the housekeeper. Then, he saw Qi Qing lying on the bed and whimpering softly. Noticing that someone had come, Qi Qing's voice became louder. When he saw that it was his cousin, his voice became even louder. He cried out in pain and said, "Cousin, you must avenge your younger brother. You don't know how arrogant the people on the other side were. They just said that they didn't like me and beat me up. When I asked them if they still cared about the law, they still ignored me. The guilty party complained first." All of this was reflected in Qi Qing's actions. And it seemed that Qi Bushen was very receptive to it. Bastards, they actually dare to ignore the laws of the great Ming dynasty. They are truly lawless. Housekeeper, immediately find out where those people are staying and then order the bailiffs to arrest them. This official wants to see if they really have 3 heads and 6 arms and are really ignoring the laws. Since the master had said so, the housekeeper originally wanted to ask if they should investigate the other party's identity first. However, at this moment, he could only suppress these words in his heart. At this moment, he was unlucky and said something that he should not say. It was not a wise thing to do. If he did not do it well, he might even vent his anger on himself. How could Qi Bushen, who could become the prefect of Hangzhou and a 4th-rank official, be stupid? However, he still did not send anyone to investigate. It was all based on his strong self-confidence. He was the prefect of Hangzhou and the local emperor of this piece of land. With this kind of power, how many people could make him feel afraid? Not to mention, he also had a very strong backer. Even if there were some problems, he was the kind of person who would protect him. Based on these 2 points, he was naturally fearless. He wanted to let those who heard his cousin know that the Qi family was not an existence that anyone could provoke. The housekeeper went out and quickly found that those who hit Qi Qing were living in the outer residence of the Chang family. When he found out about these things, the housekeeper felt confident. Although the Chang family was very rich, they were after all just businessmen. Since ancient times, people did not fight with officials. How could they be a match for the officials? Feeling confident, the housekeeper found his relative, Niu Ji, who was arranged to be a constable in the prefect of Hangzhou. Niu Ji's nickname was Niu Heir. It was because he was the 2nd son in the family that he got this name. Since he was young, his body was better than others. Later on, he learned martial arts from a famous teacher for a few years. After he learned martial arts, he found the housekeeper's relative and was arranged to be the head of the constables in the prefectural government. With the housekeeper's help, naturally, this constable's life was smooth. This time, there was a good thing again. Of course, he would not forget Niu Ji. When Niu Ji received the housekeeper's order, he knew that this was a good job to please the prefectural government. He did not dare to be tough. Immediately, he led a group of constables to the outer residence of the Chang family. At this time, the outer residence of the Chang family was shrouded in darkness. It seemed to be very quiet, but in fact, in the darkness, there were many pairs of eyes staring at this place. During the day, they beat someone in Xinglong restaurant. It was said that they had some influence in the local area. According to the rule that caution was the parent of safety, Tiger's Mane had arranged for people to wait for a long time. Reality proved that this waiting was not in vain. Not long after nightfall, there was a burst of noisy footsteps on the street in the distance. Then, a walking fire dragon came straight in this direction. That was the state when the bailiffs of the manor walked with torches. They're coming, they're coming. They're all ready. Once the order is given, we'll start immediately. Tiger Head, Tiger Ray's nickname, said that we have to be quick and clean. Yang Wu's voice came out. This time, Yang Si and Yang Lu were left behind in Yang village and the capital to be in charge of the work there. He was lucky to be brought out. Seeing that there was a battle to fight, he was very excited. With Yang Wu as the leader, they borrowed a platoon of Lengfeng from Wusheng camp. In addition, there was the cooperation of the Second Guard, Dao Shao, and the Ghost Shadow Sniper team in the dark to deal with any unexpected situations. With such a lineup, not to mention some constables and constables of the prefectural government, even if a few hundred Ming soldiers came, they would not be afraid at all. The fire dragon came closer and closer. The one at the front holding a torch was the constable Niuji. When he saw the outer residence of the Chang family from afar, he waved his hand majestically and said, "Go, surround them. Remember, don't let anyone escape." Niuji's voice was not soft. He was not worried that such a shout would scare them away. This might be his arrogance and conceit. However, regardless of whether he was careless or cautious, he was destined to suffer tonight. Just like now, when Niuji's voice sounded, the 20 or so constables and constables were about to split up. Suddenly, the surroundings lit up. High-voltage flashlights were suddenly turned on. When dozens of light beams shone on them, it made them feel as if they were instantly blinded. What's going on? Niuji raised his right hand to block his eyes that were temporarily blinded by the light and asked casually. Even at this moment, he did not know that he had already become a fish on the chopping block in the eyes of others. Pa! Clang! Clang! Ouch! All kinds of painful cries rose and fell at this moment. Each of the constables and constables who were like wolves and tigers a moment ago had turned into soft-footed shrimps. Some of them bent over and fell to the ground, wailing in pain. Among them, Niuji was the one who received the most attention. Just now, after he shouted out, "What's going on?" he suddenly heard a gust of wind. As someone who had practiced martial arts, he instinctively stepped back. However, he only took one step back before he was suddenly tripped by something. Then, he felt a sharp pain in his chest. Based on his intuition, he knew that someone had stepped on him. Chapter 337. This kick might not have been as heavy as 1,000 pounds, but it made him lose the ability to resist in an instant. Even he, the leader, was beaten to the ground in an instant. It was conceivable that the other brothers would not have a good time. The Lengfeng soldiers made their move. They originally had a thorough plan. Since they had encountered some people who had underestimated them, how could they be courteous? Naturally, they greeted them with a good beating. Waves of cudgels came down. If it was not for the fact that they did not have the intention to kill, the more than 20 people who had come would have all died here. After the time it took for half an incense stick to burn, the one-sided beating slowly stopped. Niuji and the others were already covered in wounds, and no longer had the arrogant appearance they had before. "Come on, tie them up. If anyone refuses to submit, just serve them with cudgels." Yang Wu stood in the crowd, his voice filled with pride. This time, he did not act impulsively. Hu Tu had said that this was the young master's order. Since he had received the order, if he did not exercise his fist properly, wouldn't he be wasting the mission and opportunity Hu Tu had given him? After the order was given, the Lengfeng soldiers took out the ropes that they had prepared earlier and started to work. However, the expected resistance did not happen. Perhaps they were really afraid of being beaten. Since ancient times, soldiers had always been used to catch thieves. Since when had thieves ever caught soldiers? And they just happened to encounter it. Who would be so stupid as to shout and scream? Soon, the originally noisy street became quiet again. If someone were to pass by this place at this time, they would never think that the dozens of officers had just been violently beaten up here. Jianghu and the others were still staring with their eyes wide open, waiting for the enemy to come. According to their thinking, the sudden disappearance of more than 20 officials who had been sent out would cause a commotion. It was even reasonable that the Ming Dynasty's Hangzhou City Guard Association would take action. Unfortunately, one night had passed. When the sky began to brighten, indicating the arrival of a new day, there was still no movement. This made Jianghu really disappointed. Back to the Qi residence, Qi Bushan's residence. Early in the morning, he was still hugging his concubine to sleep when suddenly, the housekeeper's shouting voice came from outside. "Master, it's not good. It's not good, master." What happened? Qi Bushen, who had just woken up from his dream, got up from his bed with a face full of displeasure. He casually put on a piece of clothing and opened the bedroom door. Then, he scolded the housekeeper who was yelling outside. "Old master is fine, but you are disturbing his sleep early in the morning. What are you trying to do? I'm telling you, if you don't give me a reason, I won't let you off today." "Master, it's not good." Niu Ji and the rest did not return for the entire night. I wonder where they went. Could he have been killed by those people? The housekeeper did not listen to what Qi Bushen had to say. Instead, he spoke in a panic. Last night, after assigning Niu Ji an errand, he came back to sleep. This was not the first time he had done such a task. All he had to do was to issue the order and then get up in the morning to see the results. However, when he went to the magistrate's office in the morning, he found out that Niu Ji and more than 20 other people had disappeared from the face of the earth. They were nowhere to be found. The bailiffs who stayed behind thought that Constable Niu had something important to do and needed to go somewhere far away, so they didn't see him for the whole night and didn't report to him. When the housekeeper heard the news, he immediately panicked. The Chang family's courtyard was in Hangzhou Prefecture City and was not far from the magistrate's office. It would take at most half an hour to get there. How could they not return for the whole night? His intuition told him that something must have happened. At that moment, he ran back to the Qi family's mansion and woke up his master. Initially, Qi Bushen's face was still full of anger. However, after hearing the housekeeper's words, he was stunned. After a few breaths, he finally reacted and exclaimed loudly, "How is this possible? How is this possible? Master, it's true. Those people must be very daring. Master, it's been a night. No one knows what will happen. Why don't we report it to the magistrate?" The housekeeper was so frightened that he was incoherent. He stood there trembling as he made his suggestion. "Report it to the magistrate? Bastard, master is the magistrate." Qi Bushen was so angry that he couldn't help but curse. "No, no. Master, what I meant was to report to the Hangzhou guards and have them send troops into the city. Perhaps only with their appearance will we be able to suppress those daring criminals." The butler realized that he had made a slip of the tongue. After correcting himself, he hurriedly replied. After being reminded, Qi Bushen's originally panicked expression flashed with joy. However, he shook his head. "No. No way. This is a serious matter. We still need to investigate it clearly. If it's a misunderstanding, then it will be a big joke." Once the Hangzhou guards were alerted and the army was mobilized, the matter would inevitably be reported to Nanjing. If it really alarmed the emperor and the imperial court, there would not be much room for negotiation. Qi Bushen shook his head and decided to clarify the matter first. The so-called clarification of the matter naturally fell on the housekeeper's head. The housekeeper naturally had a headache about this task. However, since it was his master who said it, he certainly did not dare to refuse. After agreeing, he rushed back to the magistrate's office. After returning to the magistrate's office, the housekeeper selected another 20 bailiffs and 4 constables who had learned martial arts. They went straight to the Chang family's residence. This time, it was broad daylight. He did not believe that anyone would dare to do anything to him. Of course, he was not unprepared. When he left a message in the magistrate's office. If he did not return in 2 hours, he was to inform his master and send troops to rescue him. Being prepared did not guarantee that he would not be afraid. He still felt a little uneasy when he arrived at the Chang family's residence. Unexpectedly, the door was already open. It was as if they knew that someone would come. When they saw the team he brought from afar, a man with a smile on his face came up to greet them. "May I know who you are? Please tell me." The other party was so polite that the housekeeper did not dare to force him. He thought that it would be impolite not to reciprocate. He clasped his fist and said, "I am the housekeeper of the magistrate of Hangzhou. My surname is Wu, housekeeper." The person in front of him did not wait for him to finish his words. He shook his head and said, "With all due respect, this matter is not something that a housekeeper like you can shoulder. You should go back and ask your master to come here personally." After he finished speaking, the person in charge of welcoming the guest turned around and left. It was obvious that he was a little unhappy. Steward Wu knew that his status was still a little low, but since he was already here, he couldn't possibly not get to the bottom of things, right? He rushed towards the other party's departing figure and shouted, "Hey, are Niu Ji and the others in your hands? What did you do to them?" "Niu Ji? Ah, you mean the one who was beaten into a pig's head. If you want to know what happened to him, ask your master to come here personally." The man did not even turn his head. His figure gradually disappeared. After he returned to the residence, he closed the door. The man was Yang Wu. He was asked by the 6th young master to welcome the guest outside the door. He originally thought that the person who came would be the magistrate of Hangzhou. If the magistrate was sensible, it would not be a big deal. However, the person who came was just a housekeeper. Under the difference in status, there were many things that could not be discussed. Finally, he received news about Niu Ji and the others. After confirming that it was the other party who did it, the housekeeper turned around and left. His face was no longer nervous and fearful. Instead, it was burning with anger. How dare they detain the officials? Based on this alone, the other party was doomed. Half an hour later, the Hangzhou guard stationed nearby made their move. With 200 cavalrymen in the lead, 500 infantrymen followed closely behind. The large group of people entered Hangzhou from the southern city. They galloped on the streets, causing a lot of chaos. The commander of the Hangzhou guards, Tong Qiao, had a total of 5,600 people under him. The first 1,000 people under him had a total of 1,200 people under him. There were 1,000 people under him. They were usually in charge of the security around Hangzhou. Although they were in charge of security, there were not many things that could make them take action. Unless there was an enemy invading from the sea, most of the time, they were just idling around. This time, they suddenly received a request from the magistrate, Qi Bushen. He said that a group of evildoers had appeared in the city. They had actually detained more than 20 officials privately. It seemed that they had also used some tricks. When the news first came, Tong Qiao did not hear it clearly. Of course, he did not dare to believe it. This was the world of the great Ming Dynasty. The officials represented the image of the country. How could someone dare to harm them? Could it be that they were not afraid of the law? Or could it be that the status of these people was so high that they could do things without any scruples? However, the next news made Tong Qiao dispel this thought. It was said that the group of evildoers lived in the courtyard of the Chang family, a wealthy merchant in the south. This alone made him feel relieved. It was still the same sentence. The status of merchants was still very low at that time. If they were really people with status, how could they be willing to live in the courtyard of a merchant? It would only lower their status. Even if they were powerless people, Tong Qiao did not mind picking a soft persimmon to pinch. It just so happened that his brothers had not made money for a long time. This was a good opportunity. If it was done well, it would be a big income. Speaking of which, it was the Chang family. It was said that their wealth was comparable to that of a country. As a result, a group of 700 great Ming soldiers entered the city in a mighty manner. There were already bailiffs from the government office waiting to lead the way. Then, the group of people arrived outside the Chang family's courtyard and surrounded it. Guard the front and back doors. No one is allowed to slip away. In a while, when this general gives the order, everyone just needs to rush forward. If anyone dares to resist, use your weapons. Tong Qiao, who was riding on a horse and wearing armor, could be said to be majestic. Under his command, the Chang family's courtyard was soon surrounded by people that not even a drop of water could trickle through. Then, the 200 soldiers of the great Ming dynasty bravely walked toward the main door. They were in a row of 10 people. Every time they took a step forward, they would shout. Not to mention that their voices were very uniform, there was some momentum. Chapter 338. In the garden of the Chang family's courtyard. Small bridges, flowing water, lush green grass, mesmerizing flowers, colorful purples, pavilions, and painted rafters. All of them were the work of famous craftsmen. It was just a side courtyard, but it was already so luxurious. It could be seen that the Chang family was indeed rich and imposing. In the middle of the garden, there was a pavilion. On the stone table below, there were various fruits and snacks. A young man and an old man were sitting there, drinking tea and chatting. Duke of Loyalty and Courage, we haven't seen each other for nearly 2 years. On the other side of the table, an old man wearing an ordinary long robe had a smile on his face. He seemed to be in a good mood. Sir Kuei is still as elegant as ever. Congratulations. Yang Chendong also had a smile on his face. As he spoke, he raised the teacup in his hand. Duke of Loyalty and Courage must be joking. I still have to thank you for everything. If it weren't for you turning the tide on the battlefield back then, I'm afraid this old man would have been buried long ago. Thank you. Old man Kuang Yi also raised the wine in his arms and sighed with an emotional expression. In the battle of the Tumu fortress, because of Wang Zhen's careless command, the morale of the army was in chaos and they were defeated by Walla's army. The officials were either dead or running away. It was complete chaos. At this time, Yang Chendong, who was inconspicuous in the team, stood up and successively saved the 9 important ministers of the imperial court. Later, he even saved the besieged Emperor Zhu Qizhen. Among the 9 officials, there was Kuang Yi. In the past, he was the Minister of War of the Great Ming Dynasty. Now, he was the Minister of War of the Southern Ming Dynasty. It was said that he was trusted by Emperor Yingzong. This time, he was ordered by the emperor to check the situation of the various imperial guards. Coincidentally, he learned that Yang Chendong had returned to his hometown to pay respects to his ancestors. Thus, he rushed here early in the morning to meet him. Although it was a coincidence, Yang Chendong had already asked around. Kuang Yi was a good old man. Although he was a little old, he still had some ability. To be able to meet him here and settle some matters was within his plan. At this moment, the two of them were able to meet each other as they wished. Furthermore, they had saved each other's lives as a bond. It could be said that both the host and the guest were extremely happy. However, this harmonious scene was disrupted by the battle cries outside the courtyard. Although Kuang Yi was a little older, his eyes were not blurry and his ears were not deaf. He could naturally hear the shouts outside clearly. He frowned and raised his head to look at Yang Chendong. Yang Chendong, who had long been paying attention to Kuang Ye's actions, smiled and said, "Hee, I don't know why I was targeted yesterday. Some people came to find trouble with me, but they were caught by my subordinates. They must have mobilized the army this time." Nonsense. Who gave them the authority to mobilize the army for something as big as that? Guaning, go take a look. Kuang Yi said with a straight face. This time, he didn't come to see Yang Chendong just to catch up. He came with a mission. However, before he even had the chance to ask for help, his own people had already dropped the ball. If he didn't handle things well, it would directly affect his mission. How could he not be angry? Guaning was 7 feet tall and had a powerful body. His muscles seemed like they would explode with power at any time. At a glance, one could tell that he was a martial artist. Of course, the reason why Kuang Yi arranged for him to go out was not only because he was his trusted aide, but also because he was an official of the Ministry of War. He was selected to be the vice director of the Department for Purging Officials and was a standard 5th rank official. The Department for Purging Officials was an organization under the Ministry of War during the Ming and Qing dynasties. It was responsible for the rank, selection, promotion, and rewards of the military officials. It was responsible for inspecting the strategic locations of various regions and setting up camps. It was also responsible for managing the inheritance and bestowments of the tribal officials who lived in communities of ethnic minorities. Most of the time, the rank of an official in the Great Ming Dynasty wasn't enough. The most important thing was how much power he had. For example, the first Grand Secretary of the Imperial Cabinet was equivalent to the Emperor's personal secretary. For example, Jia Jin during the Ming Dynasty was a standard 5th rank official. Don't underestimate a standard 5th rank official. Even in front of the Emperor, he could speak. He was much more powerful than a standard 4th or 3rd rank official. For example, Guaning was only a standard 5th rank official. However, because he controlled the promotion and rewards of the military officials, he had great power. Even many of the commanders, standard 3rd rank officials, of the City Guard Institute and the Capital Guard Institute had to lower their heads and smile apologetically when they saw him. Since the Capital Guard Institute had been mobilized, it was appropriate to send Guaning to take a look. Yang Chendong was naturally aware of this. He immediately smiled and said politely, "Then I'll have to trouble you, Vice Director Guan. You're too polite." Guan Ying's expression didn't change. After saying this with a serious face, he bowed to Kuang Yi and left. After Guaning left, Kuang Ye's laughter sounded again. "Duke of Loyalty, please don't mind him. This person's personality is like this. He doesn't smile much, but he is very serious and has some ability. Yes, to be able to learn from Lord Kuang, he is without a doubt a talent." Yang Chendong also smiled and flattered. Then, he raised the teacup in his hand. With Guaning taking care of the outside matters, he naturally didn't have to worry. Kuang Yi also smiled and raised his teacup. After taking a sip, he put it down and said, "Duke of Loyalty, a while ago, the Japanese suddenly invaded the border and attacked the Tianjin Guard. I'm sure you've heard about it." "Yes, this matter caused a lot of disputes in the Beiming Imperial Court. How could I not know about it?" Yang Chendong seemed to be casually nodding, but in fact, only he knew that Kuang Yi had finally begun to talk about the main topic. "Yes. I heard that 20,000 soldiers and 20,000 commoners were captured. How could the Duke of Yu not be angry about such a big matter?" Kuang Yi seemed to sigh. Then, he continued, "I heard that even now, the Japanese warriors often appear between the Tianjin Guard and the capital. Duke of Loyalty, you are going to pass by that place. Have you met them?" Yang Chendong didn't express any dissatisfaction with Kuang Yi calling the Daizong Emperor Yuan. Originally, Zhu Qiyu was the Duke of Yuan. If it weren't for the change of Tu Mu, he wouldn't have become the emperor. As a follower of Zhu Qizhen, it wasn't strange that Kuang Yi didn't admit this. However, to ask about the Japanese warriors and whether he had met them was somewhat interesting. No, this Duke was lucky and didn't meet them. Yes, the Duke of Loyalty's luck has always been very good. Saving Yuan, retreating from the Walla, building the bank, and so on, everything went too smoothly, right? When he uttered the last word, Kuang Ye's gaze suddenly sharpened as he looked at Yang Chendong. Feeling the coldness of the gaze, which seemed to be able to see through people's hearts, Yang Chendong didn't even lift his eyelids and smiled. Yes, the heavens are good to me. A calm and confident smile flashed across Yang Chendong's face. In Kuang Ye's eyes, all of this made him feel unreal. Kuang Yi wasn't young. In the imperial court, he was second only to Hu Shao. He was also a man in his 60s. He had interacted with Yang Chendong many times, but even at that time, he only had a trace of respect for him. He didn't feel as powerless as he did when facing Yang Chendong. The young man in front of him was only in his early 20s, but he felt as if he was even more difficult to deal with than his father, Yang Rong. It seemed that no matter how he probed and provoked the young man was like an impenetrable wall. Under the pavilion, it suddenly became quiet. At this moment, only a gentle breeze flashed in front of them. Of course, in their hearts, they were weighing each other's words. Their chests were heavily panting, and their minds were working quickly. Ha, the Duke of Loyalty's luck is indeed very good, and you are also very talented. This old man has seriously studied the Snow of the Yang family that you wrote in front of the Yang family academy. It is truly majestic and enlightening. But I don't know how to interpret the phrase, a man of great talent. Although because of Yang Chendong, the great Ming dynasty was divided into the south and many officials and soldiers belonged to two different imperial courts, one thing remained unchanged. That was, the poetry that scholars liked was still the same. Thinking back, when the Snow of the Yang family was spread to the capital of the southern imperial court, Nanjing, it caused a huge uproar. When many people were sighing at the grandeur of this poem and were amazed by the sentences, it was inevitable that they would wonder what kind of environment and inner thoughts the author of this poem, Yang Chendong, was in to create such a song that could be passed down. There were even some people who began to research the specific meaning of the phrase. Especially the phrase, to count the outstanding figures, there were even more explanations for it. For example, the people of the Ying sect who were hostile to the Dai sect explained that Yang Chendong was flattering Zhu Qiyu, saying that Zhu Qiyu's ascension was justified, legitimate, and reasonable. They said that he was a man of great talent, and Zhu Qizhen was not. There were also some people who were envious, jealous, and hateful who explained that this sentence meant that Yang Chendong looked down on all scholars in the world. It was a manifestation of his own arrogance. There were also some people who wanted to see the world in chaos who said that this meant that someone wanted to replace Yang Chendong. They were implying that Yang Chendong was a traitor like Cao Cao. Among these opinions, Kuang Yi was more inclined to the latter, but he didn't say this to anyone. As the Minister of War, he, who knew soldiers well, was shocked when he saw the calm performance of the cold front soldiers on the battlefield. With such outstanding soldiers, any one of them would be qualified to be a squad leader, or even a centurion, or even a general of a higher rank. But they were willing to work under Yang Chendong. What did this mean? Chapter 339. Even though there were rumors that those people were mercenaries and that Yang Chendong was willing to spend a lot of money to hire them, Yi Chendong did not believe it. Others might believe such a reason, but Kuang Yi would never believe it no matter what. It was because he had led soldiers before and knew the importance of elite soldiers. At least in front of him, if he had such elite soldiers, he would never give them to others, even if the other party offered a high price. Not to mention, with such elite soldiers, what kind of money could he not earn? Why would he need to hire them? He had such thoughts at the beginning, but because he was indebted to someone for saving his life, he naturally could not criticize them in front of them or behind their backs. But as time passed, these elite mercenaries had been following Yang Chendong all this time, and this suspicion became heavier and heavier. What he said just now was just to test and confirm. Unfortunately, he did not get a good result, which made him a little disappointed. At the same time, he also wondered if Yi Chendong was speechless and wanted to gloss over it. While Kuang Yi was thinking about this, Yang Chendong spoke. "Sir Ji, do you mind if I tell you a story?" "Oh. I'm all ears." Kuang Yi did not know what the other party meant, but he still smiled and agreed out of politeness. Moreover, with Yang Chendong's talent, even an ordinary story would be quite interesting in his mouth. Seeing that Kuang Yi agreed, Yang Chendong first smiled politely, then opened his mouth and said, "Once upon a time, there was a scholar who wanted to go out for a walk because he was tired of studying at home. Unexpectedly, he encountered an injured man who had fainted. Out of kindness, he saved the man and found a doctor to treat him. Not long after, the man's body recovered. When he left, he said that he wanted to repay his kindness." At this point, the corners of Yang Chendong's mouth curled up slightly, giving people the feeling that he was recalling something interesting, but only he knew that he was laughing at the absurdity and nonsense of this story. It was all because this was indeed a story, a fabricated story. The man said that he wanted to repay his kindness, so of course the scholar did not care. It was just a casual effort and he did not take it seriously. But who would have thought that not long after, the burly man would fulfill his promise? Not only did he send a lot of gold and silver, he also sent a lot of people to protect the scholar. He said that the scholar had saved his life, so seeing the scholar was like seeing himself. At this point of the story, Yang Chendong suddenly closed his mouth. After a few breaths, he said again, "From then on, this scholar naturally gets whatever he wants. Now that I think about it, if it wasn't the heavens taking care of him, then what was?" When the story finally came to an end, Kuang Yi fell into silence. From the beginning of the story, he thought of something. When the story came to an end, he finally understood that this so-called story was actually a fact. The scholar must be Yang Chendong, and the man he saved must be the leader of the mercenaries. If that was the case, everything made sense. This was also the main reason why the mercenaries could be used by Yang Chendong. But is this true? If the leader of the mercenaries was so powerful, why would he appear in front of Yang Chendong in an injured state? This did not seem to make sense. Since today's story had reached this point, Kuang Yi naturally had to ask clearly, so he asked all the questions in his heart. "Lord Kuang, good question." At that time, the scholar was also a little confused, but he slowly learned from the elite soldiers that the burly man he had saved had been plotted against because he was trying to snatch the position of the boss. That was why he had escaped all the way to the city where the scholar lived. Later, he recovered from his injuries and went back to take back everything. That was how simple it was. Yang Chendong spread out his hands and smiled at Kuang Yi. Since he wanted to tell a story, how could he not have thought about it from the beginning to the end? The story was not exciting, but it was still passable. At this moment, Kuang Yi did not know what to say. Should he continue to question him? But he already explained it to him. If he continued to ask, he would be accused of pestering endlessly. As expected, before Kuang Yi could continue, Yang Chendong said, "Lord Kuang, to be honest, I have never told anyone about this before. You are the first, so if possible, I hope you can keep it a secret for me." As soon as he said this, Kuang Yi was completely speechless. The other party had put on such a sincere appearance, and had even saved his life. What else could he ask? No matter what, he was still an educated person. He couldn't possibly be so shameless as to throw away his basic dignity. At this moment, the only thing he could do was nod his head and accept the favor. "Thank you for your loyalty, this old man was too rash." "Sigh, Lord Kuang, please don't say that. Everyone is curious. If it was me, I might ask too. It's fine, it's fine. Huh, drink tea, drink tea. Yang Chendong said with a laugh and put on a kind face. Outside the Chang residence, Tong Qiao aggressively led his men to surround this place, and then commanded his men to start approaching step by step. From the looks of it, it seemed that a big battle was unavoidable. Perhaps it wouldn't be long before this place would be littered with corpses. However, just when everyone was extremely nervous, the originally tightly shut door of the Chang family's courtyard suddenly opened from the inside. Then, a sturdy man appeared in front of everyone. Prepare to charge. Stop. All of you, stop. Tong Qiao, who was about to give the order, was ready to let the soldiers charge. However, when he saw the person who appeared, his mouth first formed an O shape and then he shouted loudly at his men, as if he was afraid that someone would suddenly attack. The sudden shout stunned the soldiers of the great Ming dynasty who were full of morale. At this moment, Tong Qiao had already dismounted from his horse and trotted over. When he reached the front door and saw that the person in front of him was indeed Minister Counselor Guaning, he hurriedly cupped his hands and bowed. Lord Guan. General Tong, what is the meaning of this? After Guaning cupped his hands and bowed, he pointed at the rows of great Ming dynasty soldiers who had already appeared outside the door. This question made Tong Qiao's expression change greatly. He originally thought that there was a villain here and that the magistrate of Hangzhou had asked for help. He thought that since this was related to the Chang residence, it would be a good opportunity to take advantage of them. At that time, he could casually ask for tens of thousands of silver taels. He did not expect that Guaning would appear here. Although Guan Ying's official rank was not as high as his, he held great power. He was the kind of person who could not be offended. In particular, he had heard that Guaning was the favorite student of the current Minister of War, Kuang Yi. The city guard's office was also under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of War. When he thought of this, he broke out in a cold sweat. What's wrong? Is the weather very hot? General Tong, why are you sweating so much? Guan Ying's expression was still very serious. When he said these words, it did not seem like he was concerned, but more like he was questioning something. This. Tong Qiao rolled his eyes. He knew that it would be stupid to hide the truth at this time. He immediately gritted his teeth and confessed Qi Bushen. It was because Magistrate Qi of Hangzhou said that there were rebels here, so he asked me to lead the soldiers into the city to eliminate them. Rebels? Did they disturb the villagers? Did they occupy the city? Did it cause any chaos? Guaning asked one question after another. According to the regulations of the Ministry of War, if there were rebels in the city and caused great chaos, the city guard's office and the nearby city guard's office had the right to mobilize the army into the city. On the contrary, even if the local officials asked for it, they could not enter the city without permission. This was originally a way to control the army, to prevent them from doing anything out of line. Guaning asked these questions based on this basis. Guaning was doing his job according to the rules. Tong Qiao's face turned pale. At this moment, he hated Qi Bushen to death. If it wasn't for the fact that he made the situation sound very serious, and even said that there were profits to be made by entering the city, and that after the matter was over, he could just grab a few people and report to his superiors that it was a mess and that would be the end of the matter. Then, he wouldn't have the guts to bring his army into the city. Now, not only did he not get any benefits, but he was also caught red-handed. It was conceivable that if this matter was not handled well, he would lose his official position. Although the official rank of the person in front of him was not as high as his, he was in charge of the examination. If he did not clarify the matter, he was afraid that when the person returned to the capital, he would be locked up and questioned. Since he had done something wrong, he had to accept the punishment. Tong Qiao was a straightforward person. Since he could not find a good reason, he lowered his head and said, "Lord Guan, I acted rashly and believed the words of others. I was wrong. Tong Qiao admitted his mistake so straightforwardly. A gratified smile flashed across Guan Ying's face. No matter what, it was good to know one's mistake and be able to change. Let the soldiers retreat. General Tong, please come with me. Tong Qiao thought that Guan Ying wanted to discuss the conditions with him in private. There was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. He quickly agreed and let the soldiers withdraw, leaving only 2 bodyguards to wait outside. While he was still thinking about what conditions Tong Qiao would discuss with him and whether he should agree to them, the 2 of them had already arrived at the pavilion in the middle of the residence. Tong Qiao, who was about to continue apologizing, finally saw Kuang Yi, who was wearing a long gown and sitting there. When he first saw him, Tong Qiao thought that his eyes were playing tricks on him. He even rubbed his eyes hard. When he recognized that the other party was indeed the Minister of War, Kuang Yi, he was stunned. It would be better if Guan Ying was the only one who knew about the deployment of troops. Although Guan Ying's authority was not small, he was still an official. As long as he gave Guan Ying a way out, there would be room for negotiation. However, if the Minister of War met him, then things would be different. Guan Ying was the superior who was in charge of him. If Guan Ying's upper lip touched his lower lip, his future would be completely ruined. Chapter 340. Plop. Tong Qiao knelt down in front of Kuang Yi. The moment Tong Qiao knelt on the ground, Guan Ying walked to Kuang Ye's side and whispered the story of what had happened. Originally, Kuang Ye's expression didn't change as he sat there, but when he heard the last part of the story, his anger rose. After he heard the entire story, he was so angry that he fiercely slammed the stone table and said, "What a bunch of bastards! Where did they put the great Ming's military law?" Needless to say, he was criticizing Qi Bushen. After saying this, he looked up at Yang Chendong and his expression returned to normal. "Duke of Loyalty and Courage, I'm really sorry for making a fool of myself in front of you." Ha! Yang Chendong's lips curled into a smile. He didn't say anything. Perhaps at this moment, it wasn't appropriate to say anything. "You guys go out and wait. I will talk to the Duke of Loyalty for a while." Kuang Yi waved his hand and dismissed Guan Ying and Tong Qiao. Tong Qiao, who was nervous, bowed his head and left the courtyard. When Kuang Yi was out of sight, he carefully asked, "Lord Guan, is the Duke of Loyalty that Minister Kuang mentioned the one in the north?" "Well, do you know how big of a mess you almost made this time?" Guan Ying nodded his head. When he spoke, the accusation in his voice became more and more obvious. In his heart, he was somewhat unconvinced by the Duke of Loyalty, especially when he saw the real person. He found that the real person was so young and did not have 3 heads and 6 arms. There was a trace of contempt in his heart. It was just that Kuang Yi was his teacher and also his superior. Even his teacher respected the other party so much, so he could not do anything against him. After receiving Guan Ying's accurate answer, cold sweat flowed down his neck. Tong Qiao had long heard of the Duke of Loyalty. This person not only saved the life of the current emperor, Yingzong, but also defeated the elite Walla army. When he thought about how he almost made such a person his opponent, a chill ran down his spine. It really scared him. Under the pavilion. After there was no one else around, Kuang Yi couldn't help but let out a long sigh. "Loyal Duke, I'm not afraid of you laughing at me. You also saw that this is our great Ming dynasty's army. What do you mean that he was bewitched by Magistrate Qi of Hangzhou? It's just that he wanted to enter the city to take advantage of us." The fact that Kuang Yi could see through the matter at a glance was enough to prove that this was not the first time something like this had happened. It also proved that his mind was clear. However, Yang Chendong still didn't reply because he knew that the other party didn't come here just for a simple meeting. There should be a deeper meaning. As for what it was, he had a rough guess. He was waiting for the other party to say it, or it could be said that he was waiting for a good price. Yang Chendong didn't say anything, but Kuang Yi didn't mind. Instead, he continued, Duke Zhongdan, to be honest, the situation in the south isn't good, especially after Zhu Huihua's rebellion caused the Miao people's chaos. Now, there's also the chaos in Guangdong. It has already affected several cities and more than a dozen counties. Oh? When did this happen? Yang Chendong had been paying attention to the situation in Guangdong. According to history, this would happen after the chaos in Guangdong. Last year's chaos in Guangdong had already been quelled, but Huang Yuliang had escaped. This time, it was the chaos in Guangdong after his father, Huang Shaoyang. According to the records, Huang Yuliang was the first to raise his army. However, because of his arrival, Zhu Huihua rebelled first. This was somewhat different from history. I just received an urgent message this morning. As Kuang Yi spoke, he took out a memorial from his arms and handed it to Yang Chendong. Yang Chendong didn't reach out to accept Kuang Ye's kindness. Instead, he waved his hand and said, Lord Kuang, I don't need to read these. You also know that I'm Baiming's subject. Now, my family, foundation, and even my wife are there. Don't harm me. AI, how can you say that? You saved the emperor's life. The earliest title of Duke Zhongdan was given by Emperor Yingzong. How can you say that you're Baiming's subject? Kuang Yi looked like he was seriously trying to reason with him. Okay, Lord Kuang, there's no need to be so clear about this. This time, I'm only returning to my hometown to worship my ancestors. I really don't want to get involved in other things. Besides, Lord Kuang just said that the great Ming dynasty's army is mixed. I'm not an immortal, so how can I help Emperor Yingzong? Yang Chendong waved his hand, showing that he didn't want to continue the conversation. You're not an immortal, but you have a good relationship with the mercenaries. This old man has seen their elegance long ago. They're really the elites of the elites. I'm sure that with their help, the problem will be easily solved. Kuang Yi used this opportunity to finally talk about the main topic. He wanted to use the mercenaries to fight, quell the rebellion, and solve the bandit chaos in the south. This is making things difficult for me. The number of mercenaries is limited. Moreover, the money needed to hire them is a large number. Can the current imperial court take out that much money? Yang Chendong still refused, but in reality, both sides were testing each other. The southern Ming dynasty was a country that Zhu Qizhan had no choice but to settle for the next best thing. Because everything was forced, the resources that could be obtained were limited. The amount of gold and silver that could be taken from the national treasury was even less. Although in the past year, the situation of the imperial court was much better than when it was first established due to the wealth of the south, it was still far from being able to support two large wars. Yang Chendong said that the cost of hiring the mercenaries was too great. His Majesty really can't take out that much gold and silver. Kuang Yi lowered his head when he said this, but he quickly raised his head again. With an excited expression, he said, But isn't there the Duke of Loyalty and Courage? As long as you're willing to vouch for him, that person owes you his life. No matter what, this face has to be given. And as long as we can quell these two rebellions, the imperial court will be able to collect a lot of taxes in less than 5 years. At that time, it won't be a problem to pay the mercenaries enough money. What do you think? What do you think? Yang Chendong bluntly refused. This was clearly Kuang Yi trying to gain something without risking anything. What 5 years? Who knew what would happen in 5 years? If Kuang Yi wasn't here by then, who would he ask for the money? He would never do such a strenuous and thankless job. The Duke of Loyalty and Courage is a kind person. Could it be that you're just going to watch the people in the south suffer the pain of war and have their families destroyed? Otherwise, the mercenaries can send out troops and take away anything they like along the way. How about that? As he spoke, Kuang Yi finally revealed a part of his trump card. Speaking of which, after the Ming dynasty experienced the rule of Ren Xian, the people were still very rich, especially the aristocratic families and those rich businessmen. There were many priceless antiques, calligraphy, and paintings among them. They were existences like treasures. If they were destroyed during the war, they would really be destroyed. Those that weren't destroyed would be priceless in the future. What Ryukyu Island lacked the most right now was people. What the Great Ming Dynasty had the most was people. If they could take the opportunity to snatch some people back, it would be a great advantage. Speaking of calligraphy and paintings, Yang Chendong had thought more than once about opening a huge museum and putting all the good things inside for future generations to admire and observe. He wanted to feel the deep heritage of this country that had thousands of years of civilization. Kuang Ye's words could be considered to have scratched his itch. Even so, Yang Chendong still didn't agree immediately. Lord Kuang, it's not like that. I just saved his life, and he was willing to send people to protect my life and safety. That's all. If I ask for more, I'll be asking for a yard after taking an inch. Outside the Chang family's courtyard, a luxurious carriage drove out of the mansion and went straight to the Hangzhou government office in the city. Kuang Yi sat in the carriage, and there was some disappointment on his face. He had already tried his best to persuade Yang Chendong. This was also Ing Zong's intention. However, who would have thought that the other party still didn't agree? At the end of their conversation, when he asked if he could arrange for some young Ming generals to go to the mercenary camp for training, Yang Chendong directly rejected him with the reason that the base was a secret place. This kind of behavior that didn't give him any face at all gave Kuang Yi a headache. He thought that he had already shown all his cards, but the other party still didn't take them. What else could he do? The good thing was that business was business, and personal relationships were personal. Yang Chendong had a good impression of him. For his sake, not only did he return Niu Ji and the others who had caused trouble at the Chang family's courtyard, he even sent him out in his own carriage. This was already a great show of respect. Sigh, this Duke of Loyalty seems young, but he does things like an old fox. Even if he rejected you, he couldn't get angry. This is also a kind of ability. In the luxurious carriage, a pair of wrinkled old hands touched the luxurious decorations in the carriage. Kuang Yi couldn't help but sigh. Whoosh! A whistling arrow suddenly whistled in the air. Then, there was a burst of chaos outside, followed by the voices of Guaning and Tong Qiao. Protect the Lord and catch the assassins. The chaos outside didn't last long. After a series of weapons clashing, it gradually came to an end. Then, Guan Ying's voice came from outside the carriage. Lord, most of the assassins have been killed. Only one escaped, and there are still 2 alive. They said that they were here to assassinate the Duke of Loyalty. Assassinate the Duke of Loyalty? Why did they find me? Before he could finish his sentence, Kuang Yi suddenly realized that he was in the luxurious carriage that Yang Chendong usually rode in. He immediately laughed bitterly and said, "Sigh, I really don't know if they have good intentions or if they did it knowingly." Chapter 341. My lord, what should we do? Guaning, who was outside, naturally did not hear Kuang Ye's muttering. He was still asking for instructions on what to do next. Forget it. Send him to the Duke of Loyalty. Let him deal with him as he sees fit. Kuang Yi lost interest. He did not even bother to ask who was trying to assassinate Yang Chendong. In his opinion, he was young and had power and honor. However, he did not know how to follow good advice. It was normal for such a person to attract assassins. Besides, if he were to poke his nose into other people's business, there was no guarantee that Yang Chendong would not have other thoughts. Since that was the case, he might as well hand the person over and earn a favor. After a short period of chaos, the carriages continued on their way to the Hangzhou government office. At the side door of the Qi residence, which was not far away from the government office, a figure climbed over the wall and quietly entered the Qi residence. The person seemed to be very familiar with the layout of the Qi residence. After a few twists and turns, he arrived at a quiet courtyard. Then, he opened a door, causing a creaking sound to be heard as the door opened. As soon as the sound was heard, a scolding sound came from the wooden bed inside the door. "Why are you only here now? I'm bored to death here, and the beauties you found." Just as he finished speaking, there was suddenly no sound. Then, the person spoke in a nervous and fearful voice, "Who are you? What do you want? Why are you here? I'm telling you, don't come near me. Otherwise, I know martial arts. I'll take care of you." Ouch! Before he could finish his sentence, the person who spoke was already restrained. A sharp dagger was placed on his neck. It looked like he would bleed if the dagger went any deeper. "I'm not a bad person, please don't kill me. Whatever you want, I'll give it to you. I have money, I have a lot of money." Qi Qing's face turned pale, and his voice trembled, "Spare me, spare me. I'm not a bad person. Please don't kill me." The person who spoke was Qi Qing. After being dealt with by Yang Chendong yesterday, he returned to the Qi residence to recuperate. However, he was not a good person to begin with. Even when he was recuperating, he did not stop. He ordered 2 of his followers to go out and find women for him. Just now, he thought that his subordinates had returned. Unexpectedly, it was an assassin. Moreover, the assassin's skills were not bad. He was subdued in just one move. "I don't want your money. I'm here to give you credit." There was no killing intent in the person's voice. Instead, he spoke in a calm manner. "Come, let me introduce myself. My name is Wu Yong. You must not have heard of my name, but it doesn't matter. Someone knows me, and he wants my life. I've also heard about you. The reason why I'm looking for you is because we have a common enemy. Do you understand now?" Listening to the unhurried introduction of everything, Qi Qing's initial confusion turned into his eyes shining as he nodded his head excitedly. At the Hangzhou government office. Knowing that the Minister of War, Kuang Yi, had personally come, the magistrate, Qi Bushen, brought a group of his colleagues to welcome him. The other officials naturally respected and feared Kuang Yi. Especially when they had done something wrong, they felt uneasy. However, as the magistrate of Hangzhou, the boss here, Qi Bushen, did not panic. After all, he was someone with a backer. His brother-in-law was the current Minister of Rights, Liu De. Speaking of Liu De, his strength was not to be underestimated. In the southern Ming Dynasty, Yingzong could not return to the capital after his defeat in the Tumu War. He listened to Yang Chendong's suggestion and split the great Ming Dynasty into 2. He came to Nanjing and established the southern Ming Dynasty. Since it was an imperial court, it needed the help of hundreds of officials. Zhu Qizhen made the same choice as Baiming, which was to remove the cabinet and let the 6 ministries' minister take the lead and directly answer to the emperor. In other words, Zhu Qizhen and Zhu Qiyu made the same choice. They both wanted to centralize power. After establishing the southern Ming Dynasty, the first people to be appointed were the ministers of the 6 ministries. Among them, the Minister of Revenue, Wang Zhua, and the Minister of War, Kuang Yi, were restored to their positions. As for the others, Chen Sun, who had come from the northern capital, became the Minister of Personnel, Xiao Chuo became the Minister of Punishments, Jiang Yuan became the Minister of Works, Shang Lu became the Imperial Censor, and Yin Qian became the Envoy of Transmission. These people all had one thing in common, which was that they were all officials from the capital. However, only the Minister of Rights, Liu De, was appointed. Speaking of which, as the capital of Nanjing, there were 6 ministries in politics, and there was also the existence of the Minister of State. They were in charge of the affairs in the south. The only difference was that their position was half a rank lower than that of the minister of the northern Ming dynasty. It was this half a rank difference that caused the ministers of the southern Ming dynasty to be moved. However, only Lu De remained and was promoted half a rank, becoming the Minister of Rights of the southern Ming dynasty. Merely from this point alone, one could tell that this person was very capable and had very powerful methods. Lu De was a great Confucian scholar and held a very strong position in the eyes of the scholars in the southern Ming dynasty. In addition, he was a slick and sly person, and the Lu family was one of the top aristocratic families in the south. That was why he was the only candidate for the position of Minister of Rights in the entire South. Ever since he was promoted to Minister of Rights, he had become the leader of the southern officials. It was said that in the imperial court, even Zhu Qizhan had to give him some face in many matters. Qi Bushan's backer was none other than Lu De. This was also the reason why he was so fearless. He also knew that Kuang Yi and Lu De had a good relationship. Since that was the case, he had nothing to be afraid of. Sure enough, when Kuang Yi arrived, he only reprimanded him a few times and the matter was over. Seeing all this, the other Hangzhou officials began to re-evaluate the position of their magistrate in their hearts. Kuang Yi saw all of this, but he did not want to do this. As for the magistrate who dared to ask the Hangzhou guards to help him take revenge, he wanted to directly remove him from his position and even arrest him in prison. However, he could only think about it. His brother-in-law was Lu De, and he could not do anything to such a person. He was only the Minister of War. If he wanted to do anything to a magistrate, he had to get the emperor's approval. With Lu De around, this matter could not be done. Since he knew that it could not be done, why did he have to do something like this? Not to mention that his main focus was now on the two rebellions in the southern Ming dynasty. He did not have the leisure to fight. After Qi Bushen was reprimanded a few times, the matter was over. Out of gratitude, he invited Kuang Yi to attend his family's banquet. With regards to this, Kuang Yi could not help but agree. Since he wanted the other party to be indebted to him, he naturally had to put on a show and agree to it. Thus, the entire Qi residence was decorated with decorations and it looked very lively. While the banquet was still being prepared, Qi Qing in the Qi mansion was also ready. His two attendants escorted the only assassin who escaped during the day, Wu Yong, to the Chang family's residence. During the day, Wu Yong made a mistake in assassinating Yang Chendong and mistakenly ambushed the Minister of War, Kuang Yi. After the matter was exposed and Wu Yong escaped alone, he knew that there was not much chance for him to avenge his elder brother and third brother. The money he brought out from the capital was all used to hire assassins, but they were all killed by Kuang Ye's subordinates. Now, he did not have the ability to organize a second large-scale assassination. In such a situation, he decided to take a risk, or it could be said that he was going to take a risk. Thus, he came to the Qi mansion, found Qi Qing, and told him his plan. It was to send him to Yang Chendong on the pretext that the other party caught him to take credit. As long as he sent him over, he could assassinate him at close range. In this way, he could kill Yang Chendong for revenge and would not have to take any responsibility. Qi Qing was naturally satisfied with this plan and agreed. Qi Qing thought that even if Wu Yong failed the assassination, it would have nothing to do with him. In fact, he would have the credit of catching him and sending him over. On the other hand, if Yang Chendong died, Wu Yong would be killed as well. In this way, it would have nothing to do with him. Why wouldn't he be happy to do this kind of thing where he was the good guy? After sending Wu Yong out, he just waited for the good news in the mansion. Back to the Chang family's residence. Wu Yong was actually captured and sent over alive. Yang Wu, who was in charge of security, personally received Qi Qing's two attendants. According to them, Wu Yong had intended to assassinate Qi Qing in order to frame the Duke of Zhongdan. However, Qi Qing's title of Hangzhou Divine Fist was not for nothing. He had unexpectedly counterattacked. After figuring out Wu Yong's identity, he had sent Wu Yong away. He said that everything that had happened in Xinglong restaurant was a misunderstanding. Wu Yong's action was to clear up the misunderstanding and mend their relationship. Of course, all of this was Wu Yong's idea. The two attendants listened to their master Qi Qing's words and came to take credit. After Yang Wu asked everything, he asked the two attendants to wait for a while. He would report this to the Duke of Zhongdan. At that time, they would be rewarded. Wu Yong was tied up tightly and searched from head to toe. After confirming that there was no threat on him, he was sent to the inner courtyard under the escort of Tu Lingfeng. Yang Chendong, who had heard the news, was already on his way here. Wu Yong was once the second in command of the Blackwater Gang. When the Blackwater Gang was destroyed, this person escaped. Then, he tried to assassinate him again and again, which made Yang Chendong a little angry. Originally, he thought that since this person was famous for his strategy, it would not be easy to catch him. He did not expect that he would be sent to his door. Yang Chendong certainly wanted to take a good look at this person and see how smart he was and what kind of ability he had. In the side hall of the backyard, Wu Yong was forced to kneel on the ground by Tu Lingfeng. Then, the door curtain was lifted and Yang Chendong, dressed in green, strode out. You're tuning in to the Unparalleled SwordWill YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.